Hello, this is a very impromptu video that I want to film because a package arrived and I completely forgot this package was arriving. It is my first ever book box. I have less than 55 minutes to get this done. I have been heavily influenced. Recently I found a booktuber called Willow Talks Books. In one of her videos she talked about this book subscription box called A Box of Stories, and I was influenced because there was a themed box for horror, which I am very much willing to delve deeper into, and it's arrived. I'm so happy. I'm also just like really unwell. Okay, the box is a little busted, but that's fine. Horror! Wow! Okay, so for context, I do not know what these books are. So on the inside of the box it says 77 million books are destroyed in the UK every year. 83% of those are books pulped before they have even been read. We want to save these amazing books from being lost in time forever. Every box you get saves 4 amazing books and you discover 4 incredible authors. I only have 3 books. First up, we have a tote bag. I'm always partial to a tote bag. I mean, okay, that's cute. 2 skeleton hands saying the creepier, the better. Doing a hand heart. The quality is a little, leaves a little to be desired. Yeah, you can see there the material's quite see-through, but it's quite lightweight, is what I'd say. And we've got some bookmarks. Interesting. This figure in the woods with glowing white eyes. We have, like, I think what seems to be a happy rat. Maybe he's not happy, growing some mushrooms. Then we have this girl like side-eyeing the camera with a shadowy figure behind her. I don't know if this is related. Oh wait, maybe these relate to the books. That's pretty cool actually. Hang on, this feels like a spoiler though. Maybe I should get everything out of the books first. Is there like a slip telling me about the books? No. It would be nice to get a slip to understand books a bit more, but I will look online and see if it has more information. So we have 3 books here. 1 hardcover, 2 paperbacks. First up, we have Beware the Woman by Megan Abbott. I have never heard of this book or this author before. That's pretty cool. That's kind of the point, isn't it? An eerie and prescient novel about a family holiday that takes a terrifying turn. Oh, how weird. We have someone who has a name similar to mine. Newly married and with a baby on the way, JC and her husband Jed go to visit his father, Dr. Ash, in his remote cottage in the woods of northern Michigan. From the moment they arrive, JC feels bathed in love by Dr. Ash, if less so by his housekeeper, the enigmatic Mrs. Brandt. So is this going to be some kind of, like, housekeeper drama? Lovely. Interesting. I'm open to it. Next up is a book I do know, and that is Graveyard Shift by ML Rio. I was actually going to pick this up, so I'm very happy I didn't. Every night in the college's ancient cemetery, 5 people cross paths as they work the late shift. One dark October evening, they find a hole that wasn't there before, a fresh open grave where no grave should be, but who dug it and for whom? See, this one is interesting because I have seen this in local bookstores and I have seen it pushed as well, so it's interesting to see that they consider this kind of like something to be saved. Let me look more into it. And the last one is The Redemption of Morgan Bright by Chris Panatier. Panatier. I don't know how you pronounce their last name. I've never heard of this book either. Don't know if it's just me having no clue about anything or if it is just a bit less well known. Hadley Keene died on the road from Hollyhock Asylum. The reasons are unknown. Her sister Morgan blames herself. A year later, with the case still unsolved, Morgan creates a false identity, that of a troubled housewife named Charlotte Turner, and checks herself in. Oh, we got an American Horror Story Asylum. Morgan quickly discovers that Hollyhock is not right. This to me is potentially a bit more interesting conceptually than the first book, Beware the Woman. I am always quite hesitant about reading books that are talking about asylums and like mental health institutions. I hope it's not going to be this kind of weird sensationalization. Sensationalization? Is sensationalization a word? I hope it's not going to make it out like mentally people are scary and terrifying and evil. From flipping through it, I can also see that there's kind of interview records, which is interesting. Parts of it are more your typical kind of narrative format. Yeah, I don't know how this will affect my TBR. I don't really have much of a TBR, I'm gonna be so honest. I don't set out every month thinking I'm gonna read this and I want to read that. I'm very much like, I will look at my bookshelf and I'll just pick up whatever I feel like reading next. So yeah, these 3 books, very interesting. I'm interested because the box does say that this saves 4 amazing books and you discover 4 incredible authors. However, there are only 3 books in my box. And if I order something different, I feel like maybe they should change the box to say 3, depending on which level tier you buy. So I will come and revisit these books and I will talk about them a bit more. These are not books, these are bookmarks. I will be back at some point when I'm probably less congested. I am back. It is another day. I have fact-checked myself. I got a few things wrong yesterday, though I do have some statements that I will stand by. The main confusion was that when the horror box arrived and you open up the top, it says that it saves 4 amazing books and you discover 4 incredible authors. I was confused because there's only 3 books in here, but that is because there are actually 2 tiers available. You can get the horror basic box and you can get the horror plus box. I only got the horror basic, but in the basic tier you only get 3 books. Feedback would be on the box, it'd be pretty cool if it said 3 books instead of 4 when you order the basic one, because it leads to a bit of confusion. Once again, that I'd be totally fine with if it had some kind of order confirmation slip or informational piece of paper saying this is your June 2025 horror basic box, you know, something like that. And how this works is that it's a bi-monthly box. So this one shipped on the 1st of June, the next one I'll get will be the 1st of August. So I think for the purpose of this video, I am going to focus on trying to get through these 3 books by the end of June. Is that realistic? Graveyard Shift is not a very big book. I think I can do it. And of course, you have the bookmark that goes with Graveyard Shift. So it very much matches the cover. It's very cute. It's also quite difficult to figure out which bookmark correlates to this book. There's only 2 left. I'm thinking it might be this one. This is the one where someone infiltrates an asylum. Because we have this one. To be fair, that could be our main character, Hadley. Again, this is where I think some kind of marking or even artist credits would be great as like a little added bonus to these boxes. That is all I'm going to yap for now. Hang on. How about if we put the books in the tote bag? Will I feel better about it then? You know what? This isn't that bad. Tote bag is now a bit more approved now that I've tested it. I will check back in once I've started reading the books. It is another day. I have finished Graveyard Shift, I think 2 days ago now? Yeah, 2 days. Why do I feel like I just saw something in my room? Graveyard Shift is done. This did take me a little longer than I expected. It is actually incredibly short. It's around 100 pages. It is classed as a novella. I thought this book was a teeny bit longer, but part of this book is also an essay from the author ML Rio and a preview of her next novel, Hot Wax, so it's even shorter than this. And I have a few thoughts. I've also gone and read some other people's reviews, watched some videos to see what people thought of Graveyard Shift, because I was really curious. I think that this was a really solid little read. I gave this 4 stars out of 5. But I know that some people really didn't like it. Bearing in mind that I also went into this with no prior knowledge about the author, I've never read If We Were Villains, I've never watched the TV show adaptation, so I'm approaching it as a complete newbie with no expectations other than what I read from the blurb. Honestly, overall, I think it served its function really well as a short novella. I always find it really engaging to read about stories that set out to take place over a specific timeline. So for example, this was set in one night. I think as someone who used to write creatively too, it's really interesting to see how different authors tackle this, and I think ML Rio did it really well, honestly. I don't think this novella ever overstayed its welcome. However, because of its shortness and the fact that it didn't have too much time to really explore some of the characters in depth, combined with the fact that I didn't read this in one full session, I split it over maybe 3 or 4 sessions, meant that there were times where I was losing track of what characters did what exactly. And I think also it's just part and parcel of a novella where you don't really have the space to develop your characters more and to differentiate them. But I think ML Rio did a really good job of differentiating them. I think this was more of a me issue. I can appreciate that it won't be to everyone's tastes. For some people this might be too tropey, but I found the essay that ML Rio wrote at the end really illuminating about her own story dealing with insomnia. Overall, 4 stars, and that is book 1 of Box of Stories Horror Box done. And whilst we're at it, why don't I give an update for Beware the Woman? Oh god, I'm not holding that correctly. Beware the Woman by Megan Abbott. So I purposefully chose this one to read next because of the 3 books, this was the one that I was least excited to read. So I'm sandwiching it in between Graveyard Shift and the redemption of Morgan Bright, because it's going to motivate me more to get through this, and I'll still want to go read the third one. However, saying that, I did a solid 100 pages last night. I stayed up late reading, which I tend to do, and it's not very good for me. I got sucked into this surprisingly quickly. I'm actually really enjoying Abbott's writing style. I was saying I was wondering if this was going to be like a significant pregnancy horror, and as of right now, it is, and I kind of like that. I found that a lot of horror revolving around pregnancy automatically starts discussions about, bodily autonomy and patriarchy, all of these things that I'm interested in to read about, and Megan Abbott has definitely started going down that route, and it's arguably been going down this route throughout the entire book. I am curious to see how the whole housekeeper thing develops. I don't know why I've latched onto that in particular, but also the relationship between her, the main character, and her husband's dad is interesting. I'm excited to see if it becomes more messed up than it's kind of hinting that it will become. I find when you hit kind of like a quarter, midway point through a book like this, it can either go really, really wrong or kind of just, stagnate. So I'm hoping it won't stagnate. I'm hoping that the author goes there. But that's just my personal tastes when it comes to horror, is that it just goes fucking bizarre off the rails. Another check-in for another day. So in the previous segment I filmed, I talked about how I was kind of surprised that I got through 100 pages of The Weather Woman so quickly, when it wasn't something that I was super excited to get started on. However, after filming that segment, that same day, I then went and finished this book before 7 p.m. It's honestly unheard of for me, I'm going to say, for a book of this size, which I know is not that big for a lot of people, but for me, I prefer shorter books. Wow, I have thoughts. So I gave this one another 4 out of 5 stars. I'm really surprised by this one. So my main thoughts is that when I first talked about this, I was kind of thinking, are we going to have a housekeeper Rebecca-esque novel on our hands here? And yes, I'm going to say this is quite heavily inspired by Rebecca and some of the character dynamics between our main character JC and the housekeeper Mrs. Brandt. There's a moment where our housekeeper Mrs. Brandt gives our main character JC an old, I'm assuming, kind of dressing gown robe to wear around the house. JC unknowingly, wears this robe around the house until her father-in-law says, we can get you a new robe, you don't need to be wearing that, it makes me uncomfortable. And JC's there like, I don't understand why it make you uncomfortable. Obviously she goes and fucking figures out that it's his dead wife's robe. It's very derivative of Mrs. Danvers giving the main character and Rebecca's old dress. For me, this was so entertaining that I didn't even really mind the influences that Megan Abbott drew from here. This book completely sucked me in. As I also said earlier, there were some kind of hinted dynamics between our main character JC and her father-in-law, and you're sat there thinking, they're gonna be a thing? That kind of disappears towards the end of the book, I'd say. It's very much not that dynamic. Something that I really enjoyed about this book as well is that it took place over 9 to 10 days, which for a story to develop is relatively short, but you still feel this whole breadth of kind of anxiety from the main character. It feels very justified. You're sat there thinking, what are you doing? Escape from this place. But all of the main character's actions feel incredibly justified. You're not sat there thinking, why isn't she escaping? Why isn't she calling for help? All of her actions are honestly very rooted and grounded in reality and what realistically you would probably do if you were in her situation, and very limited by where she's placed in the book or who she has contact with. And the real horror here in this book is men, which I love. I love books that are just like, yeah, this is fucking horrible because of men and the way that men are treating women. What I actually really loved is the development of female friendships and relationships throughout this book as well. I'm gonna say it only really fully blossoms towards the end of the novel, but it has a really interesting mother-daughter relationship that I think is really well fleshed out, considering that the mother is never even physically in the same place as the daughter. There's obviously interactions between the housekeeper Mrs. Brandt and our main character, which I will not go too much into depth for to remain spoiler-free. I think that was handled really well. If I am incredibly honest, this did not go as strange or messed up as I wanted. Like, it's still a messed up book. It's still not for everyone. And the reason I docked it by 1 star is because I never really felt fully shocked or surprised by the twists or turns that happened. Saying that, I didn't necessarily expect what happened to happen in this book. This book isn't, I'm going to say, super groundbreaking, very heavily influenced and inspired by Rebecca. But for me, it was still really entertaining, obviously captivated me, and I think it's well written. So 4 out of 5 stars. So now there's only one book left, and that is The Redemption of Morgan Bright by Chris P. Chris P. We're just going to call him Chris P. I am about 150 pages into this. I think all 3 of these books for me might be a hit, which is actually incredible considering I think I can be quite picky with my books. Even just the first 150 pages, I'm sat here like, oh, this is where we're going? It is narratively very different from anything I've read before. And the way that it is presented, this book could have been presented in such a straightforward, ordinary way, and Chris P decided not to. And I really appreciate him for that, because it just makes it 10 times more interesting as a book. I'm being so vague because I'm going to save this for when I finish the book and I can talk through it as its whole entire thing. I will see you after this. Let's get on to reading. My shadow is messed up, man. Why do I look like that? I look like a minion. I clearly have not timed myself very well filming this. I'm losing light very rapidly. It's done. I finished this book a little while ago now, June 17th. I'm filming this July 3rd, so it's been a little while since I finished this. I sat with it for a while. Previously, I was raving about this book when I was around 150 pages in, and I can say now that I finished it, I'm also giving this 4 out of 5 stars, which overall is crazy. All 3 books in this subscription box are 4 out of 5 stars for me personally. So let's talk a bit more about this book. Fair warning for this book, I'm going to have to go into spoiler chat. Like, I don't know how else to talk about this book without going into spoiler territory, so be warned about that. So when I last talked about this, I said around 150 pages in. This book is so unique in the way that it presents its story. Unfortunately, I feel like this book falls victim to the spoiler blurb, one of my least favorite things. I don't even watch movie trailers, TV show trailers. I don't like knowing or being spoiled about what's coming. When a blurb gives you too much information and spoils the actual content of the story, I get really angry. This is one of those cases where I really wish they hadn't written the blurb in the way that they did. Even the way that I explained it when I first opened the box gives away like a lot of what makes this book unique and special. So the blurb very much presents this different story. Our main character Morgan's sister is locked away in a mental health institution and then is found walking down the road with a hole in her stomach and dies. She becomes known as like the Snow Walker, like a sensationalized news story about this woman who escapes from a mental health institution. Then you get some very confusing switches where you have these unnamed characters talking in a car outside of this mental health institution, the woman, and we have her driver, and he's kind of hyping her up saying, you know, you've got this. So clearly from what we read on the blurb, this is going to be Morgan, right, who's created this character, Charlotte Turner, to infiltrate this mental health institution and figure out what happened to her sister a year prior. We then go straight into a police interview record. The police officer and the witness is clearly supposed to be Morgan. However, she's talking weird. She is not talking like the Morgan that we assume to be Morgan in the very first chapter, which we've just come from. So it's a bit confusing, but you just stick with it, right? It's one of those books where you're like, this is post-mental health institution. She's probably a bit messed up. She's probably a bit confused. We have no clue what our character has gone through. So from the beginning, you know that Morgan escapes this asylum. It's not really a spoiler. She's there in the police interview recalling what had happened to her. We then go to this symbol, and for about the first quarter of that book, all of the chapters are titled with that symbol, which is then interspliced with Morgan at a police interview. And as you continue reading on, you're realizing, oh, this person who's speaking is continuing this facade of Charlotte Turner, this very traditional housewife role that Morgan created in order to infiltrate the asylum. And what I really enjoyed about this book is that it's kind of really difficult at first to tell what time period we're set in, because the book also prefaces something that is called the Nebraska Family Protection Act, which essentially means that no person can be admitted to a mental health facility without due process. However, at the very end of this fictional act, it then says that this shall not apply on any occasion of a husband seeking the civil commitment of his wife. So So it's strange, right? We've got an incredibly outdated policy, essentially, that enables their husbands to commit their crazy wives into an asylum against their will. We've seen this happen before in the past. It is horrific. Time period wise, I was very confused. I was like, I don't know where we're set. Are we in the 60s? Are we in like the 2020s and we're in this weird scenario? Are we in the future? It's not made explicitly clear, but I think it introduces this really interesting preface where you're like, right, we're not following an asylum which we know is going to have these terrible practices. There is some facade of there being good practices when dealing with mentally ill people. Specifically, there is this made-up diagnosis called domestic psychosis, which is what most of the women in this asylum are admitted for, either by their husbands or, self-admission. When the police record transcripts pop up, it provides so much more added context. There are also a few snatches of previous text conversations between the two sisters, so between Morgan and Hadley, the original sister who ended up dying. Again, these text conversations from Morgan sound absolutely nothing like what we hear inside our main character's head. So you are kind of sat there thinking, what the hell's going on? I read this blurb. It says that we have our character Morgan who's created this fake character, but what's inside Morgan's head sounds completely Charlotte. Until we hit around page 100 and Morgan returns, it's revealed that Morgan essentially fell so much into her character that she became Charlotte and lost her consciousness as Morgan. You can understand my frustration here when the blurb bloody gives away essentially the turn that happens around 100 pages into the book. That's a significant chunk of a book. And it's done really well, I'd say really skillfully by Chris Panettiere. Like, it's not clear that that's where we're going. And it's quite a confusing first 100 pages to read, but for me it was compelling enough that it was not a turn-off. However, with the knowledge, I was sat there thinking, so what's going on here? Because I know that this is fake. I really think the blurb just gave away way too much, and that twist kind of just fell flat because of the blurb, but I was still hooked, honestly, at this point. And from then on, in the story, we remain entirely with Morgan, and we kind of go back to the day that she was admitted, and we see it from Morgan's perspective, what actually happened. And something really traumatic and terrible happens to her on her first day, which kind of explains why she fell into the Charlotte facade and kind of lost herself and her consciousness as Morgan. In the police interview, they do also get the psychologist to come in. One of the things that did really bug me, and enough so that I've written it down in my review, is that the psychologist kind of explains away this switch of personality down to dissociative identity disorder, DID, which scientifically, I'm pretty sure has to be something that stems from a traumatic childhood, not something that necessarily happens immediately once something traumatic happens to you as an adult, and pretty much instantaneously upon the traumatic events happening. This felt a little out of touch, considering that Chris Panettiere did seem to do a lot of research and was really respectful around a lot of the topics that could easily be stigmatized and sensationalized: women's mental health institutions themselves, and also a lot of themes, I'm going to say, of pregnancy, bodily autonomy, female bodily autonomy, and the violation of that bodily autonomy. He does really well outside of that little snippet. I don't believe they necessarily state that it has to be DID, but the suggestion of it was kind of like, hang on, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's how it works. So that was a little bit frustrating. I don't want to go any further into the plot past this because it's not really relevant to the rest of my review. And bearing in mind that is essentially only the first 100 pages of this book, so much more happens. Chris Panettiere's afterword also provides a lot of context to the overarching themes of the book. Some of the main criticisms that I've seen is that they kind of come in a little too late, as if Chris Panettiere only thought of adding these storylines towards the end, and it ends up making the characters and the plot feel a little muddy. But Chris Panettiere's afterword places it into a bit more context, where he's saying he originally just wanted to write some type of ghost story, and then with the recent changes in American healthcare, and particularly bodily autonomy for women and for people who need abortions, changed his focus on what he wanted to get out of this book and the overarching story. That did make a lot of sense. Whether or not he fully successfully integrated that from the very beginning, and whether or not it felt like two separate strands of a ghost story and this story about women's bodily autonomy, I'm not sure if it was 100% successful, which is why, once again, I wouldn't give this 5 out of 5 stars, but I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. and I loved the presentation. I thought it was just really cool to be so confused. I do love it when authors go out on a limb and make things a little confusing. You need a little bit of time to settle into it, or you need something further along in the book in order to recontextualize what you've just read. I find that really fun and challenging. I like challenging things. So yes, 4 out of 5 stars. So what are my overall thoughts on A Box of Stories Horror Edition? I'm certainly looking forward to my August edition. Considering that they sent 3 books, and of those 3, I gave them all 4 out of 5 stars, is a pretty good indication, a really good positive start. I also found that setting these 3 books as kind of a June TBR really helped me absolutely zoom through them. So perhaps that was just the element of me really enjoying the books. But maybe I should start setting myself books to read each month more concretely, and that might help me get through more books. I definitely think A Box of Stories is worth the money, particularly if you're more interested in kind of these non-mainstream books that may pass you by, and if you have a specific interest in reading horror, then yes, I would recommend it. We'll see how August's box turns out. I might also make a video about that. But yes, I really hope you enjoyed this highly segmented video. Let me know if you have any thoughts or if you've read any of these books yourself, and I look forward to seeing you in a new video soon.